So hello and welcome everyone to today's especially exciting and unique CILIPS online learning. We are totally delighted to see so many of you here for what we hope will be the start of a very special series, championing women in lists and making sure that every woman in the CILIPS community is supported and celebrated. So here comes the housekeeping as quickly as I can. If you could keep your mics off, we'd appreciate it until we come to kind of participation and breakout rooms at the end. We are recording the session, as you know, so you're welcome to have your cameras on or off. If you're struggling with bandwidth at all, we'd suggest off. And the hashtag for today is Winspiration, as you can see in Adele's slide. So if you're sharing your thoughts and your ideas on Twitter, Winspiration is the hashtag to do it by. And with that, we'll now move on to what I know you're all waiting for. And let me say how thrilled we are to be welcoming a speaker who really needs no introduction in library feminism, but if she'll forgive me, I'm going to give her a very quick introduction anyway. So Dr Adele Patrick is a co-founder and director of Glasgow Women's Library, an iconic space in the Scottish library landscape that celebrated its 30th birthday this year, just like me. I think they've done a bit more with their 3 decades. Adele works with the library staff team and the board, developing ways that GWL can have positive, change-making, creative and cultural influence locally, nationally and internationally. And she's particularly interested in the creative and imaginative development of the library as a unique feminist arts provision, redefining what a library can be through its physical spaces, digital platforms, learning approaches, programmes and resources. Now, I've promised Adele, I'm not going to go on too much about her incredible career. I think that could take most of the hour in itself, but I hope that many of you have already had the chance to read her cover article in a spring edition of CILIP Information Professional magazine about her journey in feminist leadership. And these are some of the themes that she's kindly going to be sharing with us today. I don't mind telling you that when we had a chat beforehand about some of today's themes and ideas, I was utterly blown away by Adele's depth and breadth of learning in this area. And I know that she's going to have insights to share that are as radical as they are relevant to every area of our sector and beyond. So Adele, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Whenever you're ready, the virtual floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Kirsten, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I don't know why it is, but whenever I'm in the company of librarians, you know, the world feels a little bit more hopeful, and it's certainly, hope is something that we need in abundance at the moment. So I'm absolutely thrilled that Kirsten invited me. Kirsten is a champion for libraries and for progressive thinking and feminist leadership in the sector. And I would highly recommend the Feminism for Libraries and Librarians resource that she's been developing over the last wee while, and we will share some links to that at the end of this session. And I think this sort of winspiration concept, the idea of sharing, championing and celebrating women in the sector is a really valuable one. And I really commend this sort of idea of supporting women to achieve their professional goals. And I suppose today what I want to speak about a little is how these professional goals might also sort of chime with and align with our personal and political goals as well, and the values that we want to bring to our work in the sector. But it is really important to have a space where we can sort of share and hone and develop our leadership skills together. And I know that there's an ambition for there to be scope for coaching, mentoring, opportunities between colleagues growing on from this and future sessions. And I know that I'm speaking today to people who are very, very active in a range of different settings and different roles at different points in their careers. And the title that we've got up here slightly suggests that feminism is not already an aspect of library leadership. And I know this to be true, that it is a part of libraries historically and currently and into the future. But I suppose one of the things that I wanted to sort of mention is this idea that feminist library leadership might be a sort of fugitive idea, and I'll go on to sort of talk about what I mean by that shortly. But regardless of our very different contexts, maybe our different types of familiarity with feminism, we face some common challenges at the moment in the world and in the sector. And it's one where the challenges include how the business of equality is unfinished, but also where a sector and a world where the gains of feminism and wider human rights and equality campaigns are at risk of being eroded. And I think the sector too is undergoing a paradigm shift, responding to and affected by huge external social, cultural and political tumults. My feeling is that we're brilliantly and uniquely placed to affect change and deliver for people as the critical anchor organisations that we are in this uncertain future. So I suppose I should start by sort of saying, you know, who I am and where I'm coming from. And Kirsten has given me a lovely introduction, but just to sort of reiterate that I've been working at GWL and outside the library as well, involved in research, training, coaching and developing cultural organisations, including sort of women's housing projects and, you know, lots of different things, all of them sort of equalities focused. GWL is an independent library, as Kirsten mentioned, an archive resource, an accredited museum, an art space. And yes, we've got 30 years now under our belt. That might be a sort of an infancy in terms of some of the sort of libraries that I know we've got in the room here. But as in the past 4 years or so, as a CLAW fellow and involved in sort of post-fellowship research, I'm in the process now of writing a book exploring feminist leadership. So I'm really sort of in that reflective mode, but also sort of open to looking at ideas that in conversations with colleagues in Kenya, in Italy, and in the US, Brazil, Scandinavia. So I wanted to sort of use this hour that we've got together to sort of share some of the thinking that I've been doing over the last wee while, to hear some of the thoughts that we've got the opportunity to share across the room. And really just to sort of act, almost like offer up a lunchtime provocation and ideas exchange around this topic of equalities and intersectional thinking around libraries. So I wanted to just sort of suggest this idea that embedding feminist principles and approaches in our work can offer something of a sort of a ballast to the turbulence that we have in our sector and in the outside world, and to create the idea of libraries that are fit for the future. My own background is one of being an artist and designer, and the library that I'm associated with really grew from the grassroots, and it's a different type of origin story, I think, from a lot of mainstream libraries, archives and museums. But over the last 30 years, this trajectory of work in an equalities-focused library setting, I think has been developing at the same time that the sector itself has been shifting. And we're now at this sort of sweet spot where we can have these types of conversations. But certainly our provision is one that has been fused together equalities, creativity and activism, sort of fueled by what Adrienne Marie Brown has called like the North Star, these sort of passion-filled projects, responding in this case to a need, an ongoing need to make a library space that where people find themselves and do so in a context where maybe hidden lives, eclipsed, marginalised lives, histories and differences and ideas are recognised, cherished, and from this sort of core understanding, a feminist standpoint, that the wider world that we're inhabiting continues to be discriminatory and where inequalities are almost normalised in the structures of the organisations that we might be working in or connecting with. So at the root of our library was this sort of anger, impatience for change, anger with this normative discriminatory landscape. This was in the mid-80s, and we were very frustrated at the time and continue to face frustrations around this sort of partial view of how people and culture might be represented. Certainly in Glasgow, that was represented by generally by white men, and an aspiration and hope that we can and could effect change. So 1980s Glasgow was sort of unrecognisable to many today. As an art student, I'd been coming from the north of England to Glasgow for the first time. I was sent one key recommended text to read, and that was Ernst Gombrich's Story of Art. And in its 677 pages, there were thousands of artists mentioned, and none of them were women and none of them were people of colour. Glasgow was reinventing itself at the time as a sort of cultural capital, but was being spearheaded by the regeneration process, was being spearheaded by the new Glasgow boys, which speaks volumes about how inclusivity was not part of that regeneration narrative. I was still being taught by women who had had to make the decision whether to carry on their teaching career or to marry, because the two were not considered consonant. So I would say that the library, museum and archive resources at that time did reflect these social and cultural values which were discriminatory. I wanted to put this slide up because Shannon Matten is somebody who I think is doing some really interesting work, not just in libraries, but in a sort of hybrid field. And she'd authored this article that I think I would recommend if you've not read it already, really pointing out how the mainstream might have things to learn from the process of the formation of what she calls fugitive libraries and this sort of the undercommons. So she says, by choice or by necessity, many marginalised communities have established their own independent, itinerant, fugitive libraries that respond to conditions of exclusion and oppression. Understanding the politics and practices of these fugitive libraries and the conditions that have led to their emergence, such as the Women's Library or Book Bunk in Nairobi, our sister organisation, would improve the discussions about the libraries of the future that are happening in the halls of power and privilege. Sort of fast forward 30 years since the inception of the Women's Library, there have been significant social, political and cultural change and an openness, as I say, for the types of conversations that we might be having across our different organisations. GWL has played a part in these shifts in Glasgow and in the wider ripples across Scotland and in conversations that we've had internationally. Our provision has got differences and from the mainstream, but also has undergone massive changes ourselves. We are an organisation that has got an embedded ALN project that is absolutely remarkable. We have ESOL learning happening in the library every week, and I think that's been the case for the last sort of 15 years or so. Creatives are at the beating heart of our project, so we're continually working with artists, designers, architects, writers, and so on. And we are, I suppose we're an organisation that has worked right from the outset with and represent to different degrees the hard to reach, or as we like to say, the easy to ignore. We're working locally, nationally and internationally, as I say, and we're really in a reflective mode as an organisation at the moment, looking at what has remained the same. So what has remained the same is the effects of structural inequalities on the people that we work with, and the needs remain beyond the resources that we have to deliver. So there's that sort of tension. There's also precarity in what we do as well as an independent sort of risk-taking organisation. What has changed? Well, the internet wasn't around in 1990, so the World Wide Web has happened. We're now an organisation that is staffed, which wasn't the case for the first decade of our work. We work with an array of different communities in very profound ways. But our understanding of identities is shifting continually as we learn more about how people want to be represented, how they need to be represented in our collections and in our work. I suppose one of the things that I've been reflecting on the last wee while is this sort of knotty issue of leadership, which we'll go on to sort of speak about, and how maybe I have felt impacted by different types of leadership manifest in our organisation by others and outside our organisation, but also acknowledging my own sort of leadership agency as well in the organisation. And what does that mean? What does feminist leadership mean? For some, it's a contradiction in terms, and for me, it was for a long period of time. So I want to sort of explore this knotty area because it feels like leadership is an absolutely critical thing for us to get to grips with. This is a loose sort of thing that I've been working with the last wee while. This idea of feminist leadership is work in and about progress. It's essentially iterative, it's reflective, it's unresolved, it's porous, it's characterised by dilemmas, breakthroughs, episodes of deep challenge, discomfort, ongoing learning. It's about change making. It's about a recognition of personal and political and professional accountability. Each Friday, so this is a day when this will happen, I record into a little recording device an account of my week, specifically around feminist dilemmas, breakthroughs and leadership. And I note that each week is never the same. So it's more about almost like navigating through a values-led approach to working on a wide array of challenges that are on the micro and macro level, internal and external. All staff in the organisation share their fortnightly work in a team meeting where we use what's called a helter-skelter, and I think that speaks volumes again about the ways that the ebbs and flows of work, where we are making ripples of change on the roadmap to fully sustainable and integrated equalities, inclusion and diversity agenda in the library, but also signalling where we might need the support of each other or other go-to supporters in the work that we're doing. We try to ensure that our culture is blame-free, is learning-focused, is reflective, and is developed with positive intention. I suppose feminist leadership in libraries is also about those that we engage with. It's about a meaningful equalities approach in terms of the audiences, users, visitors, people who access our resource. But I've highlighted this because I think that what is overlooked often is that feminist approaches should be about how we're making shifts in management and governance and the internal structures and communications that we use in our policies, ways of working across staff, volunteering cohorts, in board work and so on. So for us, that might be the way that we have opened up the space for all staff to be involved in the decision making around COVID, around the PEG documents that we've developed, whether that's the guiding principles that was set in motion when COVID started, the phased planning, the risk register on working from home and so on and so forth. So I wanted to sort of cite some of the questions that are occupying me now today and in the work generally, but also in this sort of grappling with this really tough stuff around leadership. So I've put some down here. There'll be ones that affect us all that are not in this list, but I've just chosen a few just to sort of speak about today and think about today. So what does a feminist approach bring to the complex challenge of the wide, deep, urgent project of organisational development in libraries? What does it feel and look like when feminist leadership is happening, is in action? What are the key organisational blockers to making our libraries and wider cultural institutions fair, just, properly inclusive, almost like beyond the industrialised, as it were, rhetoric of EDI? What are the change-making, historic, contemporary models of feminist organising that might be useful as libraries start to manage, the precarity and change that lies ahead? and what can be gained in adopting a fearless out feminist leadership approach as we address the stuckness that is there around equalities. I wanted to say what it's not as well. So for me, it's not just about creating pathways for getting women into leadership. It's not just about women in leadership. The active word here is feminist, and that can be enacted by everyone, but it's different from promoting women. It's not just about equalities as this is experienced by those accessing our resources, as I've mentioned, but who and how we work together in our internal ecologies, organisational ecologies. It's not just about mentoring for career advancement, but coaching each other to develop innovative solutions and change driven by the shared values that we're all agreeing on and feeling invested in. So feminism addresses the prevailing beliefs and structures rooted in and reproducing gender divisions that systematically disadvantage girls and women. It is political, it is personal. If feminism then is advocating for women's rights and equality between the sexes, intersectional feminism, which is the feminism I subscribe to, is the understanding of how women's overlapping identities, including race, class, ethnicity, religion, gender minority identities, sexual orientation, how these complex identities impact the way that people experience oppression and discrimination. I wanted to sort of like touch on this idea of libraries as sort of, you know, somehow open spaces that where these types of approaches have always been foregrounded. There's certainly, according to Matten and our own experience within the Women's Library, that there are complex and barriers, historic ones, to use in a library, from racism to transphobia, from lack of confidence in reading or writing English, to the impacts of coercive control and violence. There's lots of different ways that people can feel that libraries are not for them. But that goes along with this widespread mythologising of the library space as neutral, democratic, open to all. So Matten, citing Fabazi Etra, argues that the public libraries, noble associations, do not ally libraries' white supremacy culture with its built-in disparity and oppression. She goes on, Matten goes on to really detail the ways that Carnegie libraries, for example, were amongst those that were implicated in Jim Crow period segregation in the US. And, you know, we're thinking about our own library space, a former Carnegie Lending library, that there's evidence within the fabric of the building of the structured gender discrimination taking place in that 19th century or early 20th century space, that, you know, Carnegie typifies this sort of popular representation of the library as synonymous with freedom, education, democratic values. But in the plans of the building itself, our building, the main space, the huge main space, is given over to the gentleman's reading room, whilst the tiny comparative space that now acts as our office was for the ladies. So I wanted to sort of pause for a second just to sort of say where our feminism is coming from and activate the chat room a little bit more. So I noticed a year ago that the women's organisation had set in motion this where our feminism is coming from in 2 words. And there were thousands of wonderful responses, including these excellent ones from some people we might know or might have come across. And I thought that it's a really beautiful way of hearing more about where our feminism comes from. And I thought we could maybe sort of revisit this by maybe adding a little element as well, what first made us a feminist in 2 words and what makes us a feminist today. So I wondered whether Kirsten might pop into the chat room my own and maybe her own. So what made me a feminist to start off with was as far as I can remember, was, and this is 3 words, so it gives you an idea if you can break a rule, gendered school subjects, so not being allowed to do tech drawing and being made to do baking. And then what makes me a feminist today? 2 words, everyday sexism. So I wondered whether people might want to add their own chats in the chat room as we're going along. And forgive me if I'm not keeping my eye on the chat room. I'm going to try and sort of get through this text so we can hear some of your voices. But please do rattle things into the chat room. Happily, there are very few people who we might encounter in the sector who would openly oppose the idea of men and women having equal rights today, but very few also who might openly speak about their own feminist approaches to working within a library setting. Fewer still that are out feminist leaders, although they're increasing, hopefully. And I suppose this is a key finding for me as I've been doing the research, that people are disavow feminist leadership in their roles and their statements about themselves. Why is there this resistance? And is it time to take pride in having an equalities-focused approach in this way? What might the alternative be? There is certainly still a massive industry of publishing and work and training around leadership. So Daniel Goleman obviously is a really key figure here. And I listened to a fantastic recording of the CILIPS Changing Lives seminar led by Dr Mbambo Thata recently that Kirsten sent to me. And she has added, I think these 2, it might have been a Goldman edition, but she added autocratic and laissez-faire to this list. And other approaches that I've encountered during the Core Leadership Fellowship are listed here as well. But there's no publishing, virtually no publishing on feminist leadership, even though some of the aspects of feminist leadership are embedded within some of these styles, so in the coaching style or the affiliative or emotional intelligence, authentic leadership approaches. So, but notwithstanding all this publishing, leadership still seems stuck. There's lots and lots of evidence of why, of how I would say the failed leadership project is still there, and how there's still massive work to do. Notwithstanding the complexity of the leadership landscape, I feel like there are some simple, deep, recurring, rooted issues that need to be addressed in most workplaces. How power is abused, and the failure, or sorry, that should say reluctance to devolve power by those that have it. Issues around how we might ensure that everyone feels valued, heard, able to fully contribute to properly shared goals, how resources, people, spaces, material, funds, how they could be effectively used for the benefit of all, and how to address, as I say, the unfinished business of inequality. For me, this is the case for feminist leadership. And if the case needs to be made more clearly, we still have unequal pay. So from the 18th of November this year, as in most recent years, millions of us are now effectively working for free along gender lines, hence the need for the Equal Pay Day. And Nick Poole has highlighted that in our sector, the library sector has a pay gap of between 10 to 15%, even though women are predominant in the sector, and that's higher than the overall national average. So, I mean, I could go on. I know that we don't have time to do so, but clearly, you know, if we look at anything like women and BME, people suffering disproportionately from the impacts of COVID, women and BME people suffering disproportionately if they're working in the care sector, the representation of women and working class and BME people on boards, women and climate change, not least the unfettered, toxic hypermasculinity that I think is characterising global politics at the moment. Misogyny and anti-feminism can certainly be found at the heart of the command and control structures evident in lots of national leadership. So, you know, if we need to, we can go and have a look at that, but I think we're feeling it, aren't we? All of this is the antithesis of feminist approaches to governance. So what do we need? Well, Janetta Cole, one of my heroines, says we need a new vision, a new definition of power and leadership. We need to go away from the old model towards one of creative cooperation on our small and threatened planet. We need women to imagine, define and lead us towards a sane and sustainable culture. And I would say we need men to do that too. A culture of soul, a culture that values life more than war, people more than profits, hope more than despair. So some of the characteristics of or components of feminist leadership is, not surprisingly, the leadership that we want for ourselves too. Kindness, compassion, active listening, nonviolent communication, holding the space for dissonance, becoming confident with discomfort, a coaching culture. One that I really love, this idea that Catherine Mannix has been speaking about in her book Listen and in discussions lately, that we need to bring to people who maybe have what we see as challenging behaviours a good listening to rather than giving them a good talking to. The components of feminist leadership that align our own values, if they're values around equalities, with those of the organisations we're working with, and understanding more and more actively how power can be used and abused and how it impacts, and to address where those misuses of power are happening. So feminist leadership, from my point of view, is effective when people who are valued and respected as individuals and as equals and can have ownership of the vision of their organisations, clarity on the purpose, feel motivated and productive, that within a feminist leadership ecology, people knowing their roles and responsibilities, have accountability within the bigger picture, are more active in supporting their own ongoing personal and political professional growth and that of others. And an intersectional feminist dialogistic discussion-based workplace with a coaching and learning culture can result in everyone acknowledging and being better prepared for and welcoming change. Layla Billing, another one of my heroines, is stating that we, in organisations where maybe there is a clear hierarchy, that we are equal as thinkers, even in that context. So there should be no reason to not have discussion. Feminist leadership and governance, as far as I'm concerned, is always about agency and power being devolved where possible, rather than it being aggregated. It's about openness, discussion, transparency, less about closed decision-making, retention and power and control. And another key figure, Shilatha Batliwala, has written a lot about feminist leadership, and she says that an analysis of power, how power works, is absolutely essential to feminist leadership. Maybe I could just recommend that you go and have a look at Shilatha's work. I know that I'm running out of time here, but she is sort of advocating for radical change, transformational change in leadership based on gender justice. Just before we start to work together a little bit more, I thought I would sort of mention something that I've been doing lately with some trepidation, but trying to be as courageous as possible around it, of sharing some of my own feminist leadership demands. And as I mentioned, this is an ongoing iterative process. It's part of my own self-reflection. but I'm trying to sort of publish these where I can, so that I can be held to them, and so that I can be more accountable in my own work, and trying to own failures, and be actively listening to sort of how I could improve in my own leadership journey. So you can read these at your leisure. I'll be sharing these slides, but I suppose that I'll be picking out things like researching and learning from the continuum of feminist leadership. I've mentioned some of the people who are impacting me, but including my own colleagues who every week I'm learning from, and who are modelling leadership in their own roles every day. But also sort of taking the courage to call out what is the sort of normative or the business as usual when I feel that it is upholding discriminatory ways of working, and to sort of advocate and practice kindness where possible. So I wondered whether we might shift over to you to lead, and I'm suggesting that we use the breakouts to have 5 minutes where you may be pausing and thinking and doing some personal reflection and note-taking on these two questions that I've put here, and then maybe just rattling into the Padlet, which Kirsten has very kindly provided. I mean, please don't be afraid of Padlets if you're not confident with, you know, new areas. I'm grappling with that myself, but Padlets are friendly, lovely things. But it's a way that we can sort of share some of our content and thinking today. There's quite a lot of people in the room today, so I'm trying to think about ways that we could sort of do that where everybody could sort of see what they're up to. And I wondered whether, as you add the content, you could be really properly committing to an action, almost like at the latest when you return to work in the new year. So the questions that we're thinking about here is, if you could do one new thing from a feminist standpoint or a feminist perspective in your workplace, what would it be, and what might the impact be? And if you could make one new demand of yourself in your own feminist leadership journey or your journey around equalities, what would it be, and what might the impact be? So, Kirsten, I know that you're going to pop those questions in everybody's breakout as well, but are you okay to sort of break people out? And hopefully I will be here when you come back. I'm always sort of slightly like, oh, when we break out, but hopefully I'll be here when you come back.
Absolutely. Adele, first, let me just say thank you so much. This has been utterly incredible, and I really hope we'll save the chat so that you can see it, because people have been so open and sharing their ideas. We've had, as our inspiration for being feminist, we've had everything from GWL themselves to the Spice Girls and everyone
in one breath.
Yes, the Padlet link is in the chat. The questions are in the Padlet, and I'll pop them in the chat in a moment as well. So let me just create some breakout rooms. Give me one moment. Now I'm going to make sure, Adele, you're not actually in one.
And while I'll be looking at the Padlet and looking at the chat room as well, while you're busy doing your chatting, and we'll be coming back together for some final questions after the breakout.
Now, 1 second, that's us nearly there. Okay, everyone, so the rooms are going to be opening now, and I'll pop the questions in the chat. You'll also see the Padlet link, so in a moment, and we'll give you, so we're thinking about 5 minutes for personal thinking, aren't we? And then 10 minutes to share your ideas. We've all got the same Padlet, so you should, it'll be really nice to see it being populated from all the participants, and then we'll come back together soon. So I'm opening the rooms now.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Adele, I think I couldn't, you might just don't join, okay? I think I've put you in by yourself so you can get a break, but that should be everyone else in the way now.
Thanks so much, and have fun.
Sorry, I wasn't quick enough with the recording there. Adele, what were you saying about libraries?
Oh, well, yes, I was just saying this is exactly what I'd hope would happen, that, you know, librarians rock, you know, they really, really do. I mean, this is just so unbelievable. I find it so inspiring and so wonderful. I just thought maybe I want to hear people in the remaining time, but I did want to sort of point out, just in case people haven't been able to sort of look at the whole Padlet, this is something that Kirsten's going to be able to keep share with everyone so that you will have time to do it. But just wanted to pick up a couple of amazing things that have been shared already. This sort of idea of somebody saying, well, I'm early career and I'm not quite sure if I can be a leader yet. You absolutely are a leader and can be a leader. And this is not about leading from a position of hierarchy, you know, being at the top of the ladder. And fortunately, somebody else has sort of said, we are all feminist leaders. And just to sort of say that I'm being led continually by my colleagues, whether they might be volunteers or other staff team members or board members or whatever in the library. I love the way that people are speaking about literally looking at gender and ergonomics in the library setting, you know, thinking about infrastructures that suit everyone and physical spaces that suit everyone. I love the theme that's coming through as well about catching habits that we might have, habits of saying there's no problem when there might be a problem. I caught a habit of my own recently that somebody kindly pointed out to me, of sort of saying, that I'll say, oh, I'm a sort of feminist leader or whatever. So I'm really working on those habits that minimise the type of institutional knowledge we have, personal knowledge, professional knowledge that we have. There's one of the texts that it sprang to mind as well, looking at some of the comments, this idea of being a difficult voice. And I wondered whether I could recommend another writer who had a profound effect on me, is sort of Sarah Ahmed, and her work on complaints, and like this whole issue of raising issues and how people can be seen, specifically people of colour, but others as well who might want to be thinking about calling out normative discriminatory behaviours. So anyway, I will shut up now, but I would love to hear if anybody has got any comments about what they, anything that they want to share.
So everyone, feel free to pop anything in the chat or just raise your hand, either your virtual hand or your real one. We'd love to hear from you. Oh, Heather. Thanks, Heather.
Can I just say, Adele, that I think your comment of people needing a good listening to, not a good talking to, is something I'm definitely going to take forward. That's really struck a chord with me. Thank you for that.
Oh, not at all. And this is the text that I recommended. It's Catherine Mannix, Listen. She's the one who that's her quote, but it really is a line of thinking that I think connects a lot as well to the sort of non-violent communication sort of theorising and so on. I think that would be something that I would definitely recommend. But thanks ever so much for feeding back that was helpful. Any other thoughts that anyone wants to share? I'm sorry that we've got so little time, but it's just amazing to sort of see how much people have brought already. But anything that anyone wants to ask or
Darren's saying just loves this Padlet, and we will make sure it's on the CILIPS feminist list so that you can refer to it, because there's so many great ideas. And I think it does really feel, Adele, like it's been these principles in action, seeing people work together, share ideas, and the benefits that come from that in a way that couldn't be achieved otherwise.
Exactly. And I can see that Tanya and others are also saying about a bibliography. I know that Kirsten's created this beautiful resource already, and also I know is adding things even from today's conversation as well. So maybe that's something that we can continue to sort of build up.
Sarah Louise has got a good point. In their breakout group, they were talking about how important it is to find your people, the ones who make you feel empowered to make changes. Oh, and this is one of those places, so that's lovely to hear, Sarah Louise. Thank you.
Exactly, Claire. And I suppose another thing that I wanted to sort of mention there that I don't think I focused on in the sharing was maybe thinking about who your go-to people are and who the partner organisations are that you might want to speak to. So I know that there's a really beautiful thing that somebody shared with me during CLAW about sort of almost like thinking about protected characteristics and the other characteristics that might be, we might involve in that sort of intersectional thinking, and thinking what are the characteristics that you would associate with your go-to people? Are they all straight? Are they all white? Are they all middle class? Are they all, you know? So actually it's this thing, well, who would I need to go to sort of get the information that I really need about the work that I'm doing? Who has got that knowledge, but also recognizing that their knowledge might have come at a cost. So what are the ethics about the ask there? So Anna is asking about trauma-informed practices and resources, as often being a woman is being traumatized. So I would say that most of the texts that I'm recommending are mindful of the way that trauma, whether that's about the trauma of surviving racism or surviving transphobia or homophobia, or surviving that sort of everyday sexism that we've talked about, are sort of like woven into all the texts that I would recommend there. Certainly in terms of the nonviolent communication text, I don't know if people, I'm assuming that people are you know, familiar with this, but you can see how much I use this nonviolent communication text. So this is a language of life, empathy, collaboration, authenticity, freedom. And it's Rosenberg, and it is an absolute classic. But again, a recognition of how trauma manifests in some of these discussions, and this approach to working is sort of threaded through all. But I'll have a think about anything that might be even more focused, and I can sort of add it to the resource list.
Thank you, Anna. If everyone's wondering what I'm doing this afternoon, it is just on that page. We've got so much to add. This is wonderful. And Ruth's recommended Invisible Women as well.
Oh yes,
gender bias in data, which is certainly very relevant to us info pros, isn't it?
I'm mindful of the time, and I know that we'd promised that this would be a lunchtime provocation, but I'd really love people to keep connecting both with the work that Kirsten's doing and CILIPS general sort of like momentum for change here that's been being developed, but also I'd love to keep connecting with. I can see some people in the room here that I've already got lovely links with, but if you want to forge another link with me, or a different link with me, or you want to link for the first time, I'm here, the library's here, and we're always really keen to learn from you and to share anything that we're doing. And over the next year or so, we're going to be sort of doing some really deep reflection and conversations with lots of people as part of our 30th anniversary sort of work. So if that's something that you want to be involved in, then please do connect with me. And thanks for the lovely feedback and your willingness to work on a Friday. I really appreciate it, and I know that everybody in the sector is like hellishly busy, so it's really great that you set aside the time.
Wow. Oh, and can I just then thank Adele, everybody. I'm taking my mic off. We're actually going to do real clapping, lots of clapping emojis coming as well. It's just been such a wonderful, I mean, as I said, we are hoping that this will develop into a series, and do get in touch if you have any, you know, anyone else you'd like to hear from. But I think Adele has set the bar sky high. It's been the most inspirational session. We've got lots of work, but in a really positive way, and I think feeling hopeful at this time is really valuable. So just thank you, Adele, from all at CILIPS. We really appreciate today. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the invitation, and thanks to everybody for rocking up today. Lovely to see you all, and to read your wonderful comments and hear voices too.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks so much.